That was El Limebear with a song called Angels. You're on 94.9. It's 20 minutes past 4 and we have Dr. Don Batton on the line from Creation Ministries International. How are you, Dr. Don?
Yeah, Mick, I'm doing fine, thanks.
Awesome. It's great to finally get a hold of you. And apparently I did get a hold of you a few times, but you couldn't hear me and I could hear you. Funny how the systems work sometimes. I sometimes think Satan has his finger in the pie and he sort of thinks, I'll stir this up because I think he might say something good.
Yeah, well, let's hope so, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, Dr. Don, it's awesome to have you on again. Of course, for those of you who don't know Dr. Don Batton, he's got a Bachelor of Science, Agriculture, First Class Honours, a PhD from University of Sydney, worked for 20 years as a research horticulturalist with the New South Wales Department of Agriculture. His research included environmental adaptation of tropical, subtropical fruits such as mango, lychee and custard apple, and floral biology, floral induction, breeding, environmental physiology, especially water requirements, effects of water deficits, plant taxonomy and mineral nutrition. His research on floral induction of lychee and mango overturned long-held ideas which had been an impediment to the scientific understanding of these plants, as well as causing economic loss due to inappropriate management of these crops. He conducted a number of research products that were externally funded, publishing his results in science journals. And Don joined the ministry in Brisbane, Australia in 1994. He's spoken around the world on the creation issue, showing the errors in the evolutionary ideas he was taught. He's co-author of the Creation Answers book, One Blood, Answers to the Four Big Questions, 15 Reasons to Take Genesis as History, and author of various booklets, including What About Carbon Dating and What About Arguments for Evolution. Don's one of 3 rotating editors of Creation magazine and has written many articles for Creation as well as an in-depth journal of creation. Dr. Don Batton, that's the first time I've read out all that stuff about you, and you are a super smart dude that can answer all sorts of questions that our listeners might have. And we love having you on because we know that you've really studied stuff that we probably haven't. And I've got to say, reading through all of that, it's there's a lot in there.
Yeah, well, I hope I live up to the hype.
You mentioned in there that you wanted to pretty much overturn some of those things that you'd been taught as a younger man. What sort of things were they?
Well, that with the research I was doing, it was about how people understood how mangoes and lychees initiate flowers. You know, what is it that actually causes them to produce flowers in the spring after the winter? And there were some wrong ideas about that, and they were, because people had a wrong idea about how it worked, they were managing them in the wrong way and actually causing them not to flower rather than helping them flower. So the lychees particularly can be erratic in their flowering, and they don't flower. And if they don't flower, you don't get any fruit, and the fruit grower doesn't have any fruit to sell, and he goes broke.
Yeah.
So it's pretty important that you can get a handle on this. And so our research was looking at that, and we found that the wrong thinking about how it worked was actually a big factor in the lack of production. So we did some research on that, figured out what was going on, and then changed the way they're managed, and then people started to get regular flowering. So, yeah, that was pretty exciting, actually.
And flowering means more fruit, I assume.
Yeah, yes. If you don't get any flowers, you don't get any fruit, you know, so that's not what you want.
Okay, so you're the sort of guy that likes to work out where the problems are and how to solve them. I guess you like the truth.
Yeah, you got to sort of not just suck in whatever you're told, in other words, you know, and this is a matter of experimental science, and when it comes to matters of history and where we came from, you know, it's even more so because you can't do experiments on history. And, you know, when someone said dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago, Well, who was there to see that? And what sort of experiments can you do on it? You can't. It's a belief system about the past. And so we tend to believe whatever we're told, especially if it's some professor from the university. But when it comes to these matters of history, matters of things that happened in the past, there's not really science in the sense of something you can test and do experiments on. Whereas I was working with the lychees and mangoes, I was doing experiments in the here and now to demonstrate what was happening, understanding how things operate in the present rather than, trying to work out what happened in the past. So,
but interestingly, you were working on things that, of course, man has been growing pretty much forever, and we've been trying to get better crops the whole time, and there's probably a lot of people working on doing that, whereas, people looking at the history of a dinosaur and when they died out, there's only a few people looking at that. And by the same token, you're dealing with something that is here and now that you can experiment on. And I guess everyone had it wrong regardless. And you were able to do the research and figure it out. Hey, it was wrong. We need to change things. Yet there's so few people looking at dinosaurs. And obviously there's people like yourself that are saying, hey, we think we know the truth. But I assume it's harder to get through to some people.
Well, when it comes to matters of what happened in the past, I mean, what drives that is your worldview or where you believe you came from. I mean, if you don't want to believe in a creator, God who created everything, then the only alternative is to believe everything just made itself. So that's what drives all this. And of course, if everything made itself, it must have taken a long time because it's so improbable. So therefore, you need all these millions and billions of years to make it even remotely believable. And that's where all that stuff comes from. So, and then people just hear nothing else. You think about it, my wife and I are going to the Queensland Museum on Wednesday to see an exhibit on Egypt. You think about what's in the museum. There's all these displays of magnificent fossils of dinosaurs and all sorts of animals, and they got these labels on them saying millions of years ago, this, that, and everything else. Nobody really knows that. But all these kids are walking through there with their school excursions, seeing all these signs, and so they just soak it in and it becomes part of the way you think. And I confessed that even as someone who believed in God, a creator, soaked in the idea that things are millions of years old, and when I'd had the experience of seeing how wrong experimental science even can be, I also questioned the so-called historical science and started to wonder about that. What in that we've been misled about, not necessarily deliberately misled, but people have got the wrong idea about this. How many of these things? And one of the things is, I hear people say things like, oh, carbon dating proves things are millions of years old. Have you heard that?
Yep.
So, and when people say that, I know straight away they don't know anything about it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, because of the way carbon dating works. And look, we've got to go into a quick break right now, but we might come back and talk a little bit about how carbon dating works and how wrong that particular thought is. You're on 94.9. It is 29 minutes past 4. That was Need to Breathe with Hard Love. You're on 94.9. It is 23 minutes to 5 and we have Dr. Don Batton on the line. We've been talking about old stuff and how to measure it and carbon dating. And Dr. Don, I know that a few years ago when I spoke to you guys and you spoke about carbon dating, and I got told back then that the instruments we have at the time can only go back, in the tens of thousands of years. And when people talk about, things being carbon dated and they're millions of years old, surely we've got a new instrument by now that can measure that far?
Well, the carbon dating is limited by the fact that the carbon-14, which is the radioactive element that's measured, decays relatively quickly. So after 5,730 years, that doesn't sound quick, but half it disappears. And so when you start factoring in millions of years, it doesn't take long to realise that there can't be any carbon-14 present after millions of years.
Yeah.
So you can't use it to measure ages of millions of years. It only works on thousands of years. It's not a limit on the machinery, on the detection technique, because atomic mass spectrometry, it's called, is very, very sensitive. It can measure one atom type of thing.
Yep.
So it's not the limit on the actual machine. It's a limit on the actual method. So frankly, if you have something which is millions of years old, it can't have carbon-14, which was present there when it was formed. For example, take dinosaur fossils are supposed to be at least 66 million years old, and so no dinosaur would have carbon-14 present in it presently unless it was contamination.
Yep.
Contamination recently, within the last thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
However, you find that all the dinosaur bones have carbon-14 present in them above background levels.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's interesting, there was a paper published or submitted to the American Geophysical Union's Oceania Geosciences Society Conference in Singapore in 2012. It's called the Western Pacific Geophysics Meeting in Singapore, 2012. And there were some French and German scientists submitted a paper showing carbon-14 present in 8 dinosaur bone specimens and gave ages of thousands of years, and right in the ballpark of what we'd predict. But if the dinosaurs were millions of years old, which is because what the museums all tell us and everybody tells us all the time, there shouldn't be not even one atom of carbon-14 should be left in them.
Yeah.
But they're there. Now, here's the rub. There's a physicist from the French Atomic Energy Commission. There was the lead author from Germany, Dr. Thomas Seiler, the German physicist, the PhD from the Technical University of Munich, and all these co-authors, and they did all this work, showed clearly there was carbon-14 above background levels, a can't be contamination, submitted the paper, it was accepted for the conference, and then somebody got wind of this and deleted their presentation from the conference.
Oh, wow.
Deleted their presentation. So apparently you can't rock the boat with this sort of stuff. You've got to toe the line millions of years, and anybody who steps out of line will be cancelled. So that's what happened. So if the listeners want to go and have a look at the story about this, it's radiocarbon in dino bones, radiocarbon in dino bones on creation.com, written by Dr. Carl Whelan. So international conference results censored. So these people, they got censored because it didn't fit the story. But it's not just dinosaur. Coal. Coal is supposed to be anything from 10 to 300 million years old, and yet we predicted, creationist scientists predicted, that it would all have carbon-14 in it and all have a similar amount of carbon-14 because we believe that the coal was formed in Noah's flood, over the year-long Noah's flood, and all that material, the wood and everything was buried, became coal, actually was buried at the same time, so it all would have the similar amount of carbon-14, and it would have carbon-14. That was the prediction. Guess what? It all has carbon-14, and it all has a similar amount of carbon-14, just like we would predict from believing that it formed in Noah's flood.
Yeah.
So this is powerful evidence against the millions of years story.
Absolutely. What about the half-life, though? You say there's a particular half-life. Could that half-life have changed? Like, is it always constant, or could Noah's flood, all the water, is there anything in the atmosphere that could have changed how long a half-life lasts?
Yeah, good question. And there is evidence that, in fact, the rate of decay hasn't been constant. But here's the thing. The whole dating system, all the dating systems based on radioactive decay assume constant decay. And that's how you get, with some of the techniques, you get, millions and billions of years, but this opens up another whole area, which is research done in the United States by some geologists and physicists, and you can look it up on creation.com under the RATE project, R-A-T-E, just look R-A-T-E on creation.com, you'll find the information about it. But basically they found evidence that there's been a period of rapid decay in the past. In other words, and particularly with these the dating techniques like they said, potassium argon dating and uranium lead dating and things like this. These things tend to give them millions and billions of years, but those techniques, strong evidence that there's been a period of rapid decay in the past, which then brings those dates into line with a much younger age, which would be suggested by the carbon dating.
Yeah.
So, there's evidence that the decay rates haven't been constant, but they've actually been accelerated, which actually makes the ages shorter.
Yes, okay. So it goes in the favour of creation, not evolution.
That's correct. That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, you talk about carbon dating. Of course, there's a machine that can actually do it. It can sort of sit there and say, okay, this is how much carbon-14 is left in whatever. But there's other types of dating. And, we've heard about other forms of dating. People go, carbon dating can't tell us how old the dinosaurs are. So then they talk about, radiometric dating and all this sort of stuff. How much different is that?
Well, carbon dating is one method of radiometric dating. So radio means radioactive. So using radioactive elements to date things. And so I mentioned just a minute ago about uranium lead dating and potassium argon dating, and there's all the different techniques that are used, but they're all based on measurements done by a machine called an atomic mass spectrometer. And this is an incredibly precise machine that can measure even one atom of a material. So the measurements can be done extremely accurately of the actual amounts of the isotopes, right? So if you take uranium lead dating, uranium-234 or uranium-238, it breaks down to lead 204 and 208 and so on over a number of steps. Mm-hmm. And so they measure the amount of uranium present, the amount of lead present, and then taking into account how long it would take, measured currently, to break this down and then calculate an age. That's how it works. But it's all assuming several things. First of all, that the amount of uranium hasn't changed through leaching in or leaching out or anything else like that. And the amount of lead is all due to the breakdown from uranium. There's no actual, what I call primordial lead. In other words, there's no lead in the actual stuff to start with. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to make these assumptions. And, of course, no lead is leached in or no lead is leached out and so on. You make all these assumptions, then you calculate an age. And the other assumption is there's been constant decay rate, so it hasn't changed. As we said a while ago, there's strong evidence, in fact, there has been a period of rapid decay in the past. So, it depends on a raft of assumptions, which nobody can demonstrate. Nobody was there in the past with you can't go back with a time machine and check out what happened, So we don't. Yeah. We're shooting in the dark with all this stuff.
I have a bit of a question when it comes to, someone finding a skeleton that's 300 million years old, and then just down the road they find one 400 million years old. Well, the one that's 300 million years old, if they use one of these forms of radiometric decay, they say, okay, well, there was this much in the beginning of a certain element that has broken down. What was there the day before? What was there the year before? What was there a century before or a million years before that? I mean, surely there was something there. Wasn't that same thing there? And why didn't it decay then?
Yeah, not sure what the point is there. I'm sorry, Mick.
No, well, for instance, with rocks, I guess I went on to, a skeleton, but with rocks, you hear them talking about the age of rocks, and they quite often, say something so old because it was so deep in the sort of strata, and that they've measured the date of rocks. I wonder what was there.
Yeah.
Do they use radiometric decay to find out the date of rocks, or?
Yeah, well, that's what we're talking about here with, say, potassium argon dating. This is used on volcanic rocks. So when a volcano spews out some lava, it solidifies, and the potassium argon dating supposedly tells you when that solidification happened. And here's the thing: when you do that on rocks we know the age of. Yep. For example, volcano in Hawaii or volcano in New Zealand or Mount St. Helens in the northwest United States, and you get some lava that's solidified within. We saw it happen, and you do potassium argon dating in it. You get hundreds of thousands or millions of years for something we know happened 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So when you test these things against things we actually know the age of, you tend to get these spurious results of millions of years. So the question is, how can you test them? How can you trust them on things we don't know the age of? And you can't.
Yeah.
You basically can't trust them. We don't know. And we do have an historical record from the Bible about the history of the world, and that's the only way we can know. I mean, how do you know how old you are? You have a birth certificate. Your mother was there and witnessed it. The doctor witnessed it. They signed it, or whatever. There were witnesses, and you know how old you were. Otherwise, you've just got to guess.
Yes.
And that's what all this stuff's about. And, of course, you can guess based on the number of wrinkles you have or whatever. But
Yep. Wow.
But you don't know. You have a historical record, and the Bible's basically like a birth certificate of the universe. It's God's record of what happened and the time frame and everything.
Yeah, so we can trust it, whereas the instruments we use are pretty much proven to be wrong.
Yeah, so they're untrustworthy, but and we can understand them in the context of what happened during Noah's flood, and particularly things like, all that coal formed during Noah's flood, not over hundreds of millions of years. The dinosaur fossils, basically we're looking at, most of them formed during Noah's flood.
Yeah.
So consequently, they also have a similar amount of carbon-14 present in them.
That's interesting.
And you even get carbon-14 in diamonds, by the way, and that's a huge problem for the millions of years story, because the diamonds are supposed to be billions of years old, and a guy goes to the jeweler to get his fiancée or girlfriend his diamond ring, to get put on a finger, and he gets told how many billions of years old the diamonds are. That's why they're so expensive.
Yeah, right. Wow.
But here's the thing: creationist physicists actually predicted there could be carbon-14 in diamonds. Yeah. And here's the thing: you can't put carbon-14 into a diamond after it's made, because the crystal structure in the diamond, there's no space in it to put anything extra in it, because all the little carbon spots are already taken up with carbon. That's why diamond's so hard.
Yes.
And so they actually tested it and found that nearly all the diamonds they tested actually had carbon-14 above background levels, which shouldn't be there if they're billions of years old, that's for sure. So that's just another example of where the millions and billions of years don't make any sense.
Yeah, so we can trust creation. Dr. Don Batton, another awesome week, and I thank you so much for being with us this week.
Thanks, Mick. Good to talk to you.
You're on 94.9. It is 9 minutes to 5. We've got Lauren Daigle up next. These Other Days.